Sword of Coming Chapter 8:17. At the junction of Susui country and Guyu country, in the green mountains and green waters, the wind is sunny, there is a pair of men and women walking side by side, hiking and climbing towards a mountain temple on the top of the mountain. Sword-backed man, don't wear the host on his head, blue shirt and long coat and cloth shoes. The woman carries the sword box on her back and wears a snow-white robe. Both people and scenery can be painted. The mountain is named Jingling. It was built more than 20 years ago. The temple is not of high rank. The one who enjoys incense is a goddess of the mountain who has never heard of the local people. At the beginning, it was sealed by an abbot of the Ministry of Rites of the country. At the beginning of the ceremony, scholars from the prefectures and counties were busy climbing relatives to seek ancestral shame, but it was a pity that they searched through official history books and local county chronicles, but couldn't find out which wife Lu Qian was in history. There is a famous Huang River nearby, and during the rainy season, there is the sight of Huang Lu and spring rising. The peaceful years at the end of the troubled times are more cherished, especially bright, so it coincides with a wedding banquet held at the Huanghe king's mansion. The marriage of the river is a rare event in a century. Therefore, from local officials to the people in the market, it is very festive like the New Year. By the way, the incense from Jinglingshan Temple is also a little better than usual. The men and women who came to visit Jinglingshan Shrine were Qin Pingan and Ning Yao, who traveled southward. When Qin Pingan came, he talked to Ning Yao about the general situation of the old Jianshui villa. Wei Song Sr. was willing to give up his ancestral business, relocate to this seclusion, and the insider trading with the court of Susui state, Lu Qian's true identity. The four evil spirits of the former Shui nation mentioned that Su Lang, the green bamboo sword immortal of Songshi nation, said with a smile at this moment. This mountain is commonly known as the tip of the heart. On the other side of the Huanghe River, there is a cliff-cut list book, Vermilion 8 characters, Bashenkyuju and Longmian Resurrection. The Huanghe master thought it was a good omen, so he built the Huanghe Shui mansion in the water under the cliff. In fact, according to general landscape rules, the Shui mansion should not be so close to the mountains to open a mansion, and it is easy for the landscape to conflict with each other. Ning Yao asked, "Great King Huanghe? What is it?" Qin Pingan laughed softly. "The real body is a giant catfish, the Huanghe River is turbid, and the road blind date, but I heard that this river usually likes to be a Taoist, likes to talk, is quite elegant, so I don't like the name of the king of Huanghe. It's just that the people of the two countries along the Huanghe River still like to shout like this, it's hard to change." Ning Yao said, "If you take a concubine, you can take a concubine. What does the river marry a wife?" Qin Pingan immediately suppressed his smile and said nothing more. When we arrived at the Jingling Mountain Shrine, the scattered pilgrims were mostly scholars, because the abbot of the Ministry of Etiquette who was enshrined in this mountain back then was responsible for the abbot of Susui state who will take the exam this year. Qin Pingan twisted out the 3 mountain incense, and after lighting it, it was naturally different from the vulgar man who worshipped the incense and prayed for blessings. Even if he bowed his head, he did not agree with the ceremony. Qin Pingan only paid homage to the 4 directions and did not worship the mountain empress in the temple. Then put it in the incense burner. Ning Yao didn't even light incense. It's not that Ning Yao looked down on Lu Qian's identity as a landscape god. After all, Lu Qian, a mountain temple, would definitely not be able to bear Ning Yao's 3 nods, so even Ning Yao, yes, Qin Pingan will stop it. There was a burst of brilliance on the painted statue of the god, and a woman in a precarious dress quickly walked out of the golden body of the mountain god. Lu Qian displayed a blindfold and her own magical powers, so that the ordinary master who came to the temple to make a wish did not know each other. Qin Pingan and Ning Yao stood in a secluded place. Lu Qian was full of vigor and bowed in salute. Qin Pingan and Ning Yao held fists in return. Lu Qian whispered, "Master Qin, is this Ning Jianxian from the Great Wall of Sword Qi? Ordinary people, how dare she ask that? If she asks the wrong person, the woman in front of her will not have the surname Ning, and the consequences will be disastrous." It's just that on Qin Pingan's side, Lu Qian still knew it well. Ning Yao smiled and nodded. "I heard Qin Pingan talk about the past of Lu Qian and Song Fengshan before. It was not easy to get together." Lu Qian smiled Yanran and said suddenly, "It's no wonder that young Master Qin is willing to travel thousands of miles of mountains and rivers, and he has to go to Jianxi Great Wall to find girl Ning." Qin Pingan smiled and asked, "Senior Song is in the house now, right?" Lu Qian nodded and said, "Last time Grandpa Jianghu returned home, I heard that after Qin Gongzi returned to his hometown, he would walk the rivers and lakes again and he would be close. Every time he stopped at the door." Speaking of this, Lu Qian couldn't help smiling. The unsmiling grandfather in the past is now like an old child. Fengshan is in charge of drinking and drinking secretly. Every time he pretended to walk to the door, he would deliberately avoid Fengshan. Later, Fengshan deliberately asked if he wanted to send another letter to Luopishan, urging Qin Pingan, and the old man blew his beard and stared at him and said to beg him. It is not uncommon for love to come or not. However, during this period the old man stopped drinking as if he was saving. Qin Pingan asked, "Sister-in-law just came from the Huanghe water mansion? Will it be delayed?" Lu Qian shook her head and smiled, "No delay. Jingling and Huanghe have a good relationship. This time the river is married, Fengshan and I will go there to help receive guests. Only after hearing the voice of Qin Gongzi, I will reply first." Tits passed on to Grandpa. Fengshan had already set off right now, so he went directly to the house to avoid detours and make Grandpa wait for a long time. One of the reasons why Lu Qian chose this place to build an ancestral temple was that Song Yushao and the water of the Huanghe River were good friends. Qin Pingan clasped his fist and said, "Then ask my sister-in-law to lead the way." Lu Qian took the lead to travel far away in the wind. Qin Pingan and Ning Yao followed. The house was away from the temple and Bailishan Road. After Song Yu washed his hands with a golden basin, he retired to the mountains and forests. For so many years he occasionally went to the rivers and lakes to relax. No more swords, no more going out after going through the old almanac. The three of them fell at the door of the house. Compared with the former martial arts sacred place Jianshui Villa in Qingshan County, the house in front of them was shabby. At the door stood an old man with white beard and hair, his hands behind his back, his stature slightly rickets. Squinted and smiled. Qin Pingan twisted his wrist, and a handful of bamboo yellow scabbard appeared in his hand. He raised it high and gently tossed it to the old man. Song Yushao was taken aback, stretched out his hand to catch the scabbard and said in doubt, "Boy, how did you get it back? By borrow grab?" At the end of the day the old man laughed out of his own mind, and his mother, "Didn't this little melon skin get the scabbard back?" Qin Pingan hurried forward and smiled. "According to the rules of the world, how can people take it and return it?" Song Yushao was a little worried. 20 years ago, that servant was a great master of the far travel realm. In his early years he looked at his contemplative spirit. He was not like a short-lived ghost. The future of martial arts would definitely have to go up. Your kid is fine, right? It can be seen that Qin Pingan has some injuries right now. Could it be because of the scabbard? Such an act is too uneconomical. That imposing dragon across the river, casually swaying its head and tail, is like a wave of stormy waves for the rivers and lakes of more than 10 countries, including the watering and Tsai. Qin Pingan smiled and said, "His name is Ma Zhuxian. He is a great warrior of the Middle-earth warrior and a leading general. When I asked about the boxing he was the bottleneck of the 9 realms." Lu Qian's face was pale. Even if she knew that Qin Pingan was the last hermit of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, or one of the 10 young people in the world, when she heard that the man was a martial artist who was the bottleneck of the 9 realms, Lu Qian was still frightened. Song Yushao clenched the bamboo scabbard in his hand and asked, "Xuanhuan is very dangerous?" Qin Pingan shook his head and whispered, "This injury on my body is to compare it with others. It has nothing to do with Ma Zuxian's questioning boxing. It is not dangerous at all." Song Yushao stared. "With such a big tone, why don't you just fight Chao Ci?" Qin Pingan nodded and blinked. "I just beat Chao Ci. Anyway, I came here for a drink today. Besides, it's hard to say who is high and who is low in persuading wine." Song Yushao choked for a while and simply ignored the kid and did something boastful. He wanted Yun Nanfeng to speak out like the old man himself when he was young. Song Yushao turned his head and smiled and looked at that woman, Ning Yao. Ning Yao clasped his fist and said, "Younger Ning Yao, I've seen Grandpa Song." Song Yushao clasped his fists in return, then smiled while stroking his beard, squinting at someone. "You are a blessing." After entering the house together, Lu Qian took out the drinks and served a few plates of wine and dishes. After Ning Yao and Lu Qian toasted with Song Yushao and Qin Pingan, they left the wine table and let them drink alone. Song Fengshan was still on his way because he was only a martial artist in the 7 realms and could not travel far away from the wind. Naturally, he would not come and go like the wind like Lu Qian, the wife of a mountain god. Song Yu burned a wine bowl in one hand and pointed with the other hand, flicking the bamboo scabbard lying horizontally on the table, sighing with emotion. "You kid said lightly and casually, but I know how difficult it is. It's not only about Ma Zhuxian who has won the 9 realms with Xuanhuan, but the old man is talking about why Qin Pingan can go to this day. Come here, sit down and drink." Qin Pingan raised the wine bowl and said with a smile that it was too late. He fined himself 3 bowls first. After drinking 3 bowls in a row, he pours the wine and gently touched the bowls of Senior Song, and drank them all and then pour the wine to the full. For the bowl, Qin Pingan took a large chopsticks to serve the wine and the dishes slowly. Song Yuxiao smiled and said, "How did you fight with Ma Zhuxian?" Your kid said. "This is the real accompaniment dish." Qin Pingan only briefly talked about the process, and he didn't have a few punches anyway. Song Yuxiao had drunk, wiped his mouth and said, "Did you hit you?" Qin Pingan nodded, raised one foot and stepped on the bench. "If you dare to ask a punch in the future, let him fall again until he doesn't dare to ask a punch." Song Yuxiao lifted his chin. Qin Pingan began to pretend to be stupid. Song Yuxiao had to remind, "If you ask for such a heavy punch, you should not drink a big bowl of wine. The bowl at home is small. You should drink 2 bowls first. It's not drunk to drink except when you are full. Don't be so haggling. Persuade alcohol on the wine table to hurt your character, but just eat vegetables and not drink and wait for others to persuade you to drink." Qin Pingan said helplessly, "Wait a while for Brother Song to come to the wine table. Seniors tell him this. Let Brother Song learn from me. Drink 3 bowls before sitting down." Song Yu said with a smile, "Fengshan is holding back bad. A few years ago if you had been talking about having a girl, maybe you can be someone's old wife, now it's all right and it's completely useless. Wait a minute, you can see for yourself I can't bear to hold it." Qin Pingan wiped his face, "Look for a drink." Song Yuxiao kicked his boots, sat cross-legged, eyes gleaming, and asked with a smile, "I saw a lot of sword immortals on the Great Wall of Jianghu, right?" Qin Pingan nodded, "I've seen it all." After that, Song Yuxiao didn't ask much about Qin Pingan's past in the Great Wall of Jianghu, a young foreigner, how he became a hermit, how he became a real sword repairer, and in that battle the old man didn't ask who made the sword and punches, which sword fairy fought side by side, how many toasts on the wine table, and how many silent partings on the battlefield. Qin Pingan didn't ask why he didn't see the old butler of Chu in the concierge, but he just asked about the current situation of the rivers and lakes of the country of combing water. He learned that Wang Yiran, the martial arts leader of the Hengdao Villa, had improved his sword skills. After Su Lang, the green bamboo sword immortal of the Songshi kingdom, he became the second martial artist of the 7 realms in the rivers and lakes. He broke the border several years earlier than Song Fengshan. Su Lang is now closed, and it is said that if he has the hope of leaving the border, he has become a far traveler. Before this retreat, Su Lang, who was carrying green bamboo with his sword and hanging green bamboo, made a special trip to visit this place to recount the old days with Song Yu. It was a smile and grudge. As for the real identity of the General Chu Hao of Xia's xuanhuan son, he has already given power to the country and completely emptied the emperor. Because of the battle that hit the central part of Aquarius, Han Sun has made outstanding achievements in battle and has not retreated in several deadly battles. Hard fighting, dispatching troops and generals, playing quite well organized, very happy, and the wind has changed. The leader of the Chu party, who was condemned by everyone in the past, has become quite famous in temples, Shilin and Jianghu. Therefore, there are rumors that His Majesty has deliberately renounced the situation. Because the granddaughter-in-law Lu Qian is a spy of Dali, Song Yuxiao knows more inside stories. Today she is still the country of combing water under the Dali clan. His Majesty deliberately breaks away from this level of identity, and he really can't compete with the one who holds multiple positions. The great General Chu Hao, or Han Wanson, who attached to the Dali Song clan, is equivalent to the Emperor Han Wanson and Dali dynasty. The 3 parties have done business under the table, and there is no need to be the son of today. Shang is still an unknown prince from the country of Susui. Of course, it was one son's replacement status, so he only changed the year number, not the country name. And Chu Hao, who has made great achievements, will also surprise people. The future Shui nation will not be a vassal of Dali Song, but will only be better than a vassal. There must be many secret schemes like this in Dali. After Song Fengshan rushed to the house, Qin Pingan changed his method to persuade him to drink 3 bowls of wine before he could sit down. Qin Pingan smiled and said, "Previously attached to the Confucian temple recently, I saw 2 Yuzhou Chio's children, Senior Song. Would you like to go to Yuzhou for hot pot together?" Song Yuxiao waved his hand and said, "I can't go anymore. Hot pot is not bad for that meal. At most you can go to Dei on the long road. If you are too free to look back you can stop by your hill. Wait for me deliberately, I will go by myself even if I have seen it, it doesn't matter if your kid is on the mountain or not." Drinking and drinking, Song Fengshan, who once threatened to beat Qin Pingan on the wine table, is already dazzled. Every time he raises the wine bowl, the guy on the opposite side just lifts his head up and gets bored in one mouthful, and then you are free. This kind of persuading wine is the most terrible, so how can Song Fengshan be free? Qin Pingan was 10 years younger than himself, and he was no longer inferior to swordsmanship. Could it be that he had to lose even the amount of alcohol? Of course not. Song Fengshan, who had been drinking too much, had to pull Qin Pingan to draw a punch. The result was a mess. I ran outside the door twice and squatted. Lu Qian gently patted her back. After Song Fengshan wiped it dry, she wandered back to the wine table and continued drinking. Ning Yao reminded once that you are a guest anyway. Let Song Fengshan drink less. Qin Pingan was helpless, and said that brother Song couldn't drink enough and he had to drink. I really couldn't stop it. Ning Yao made Qin Pingan stop himself with a mouthful of boredom. Under the eaves of the house, Ning Yao had to apologize to Lu Qian. Lu Qian smiled and said that it was okay. The opportunity was rare. Today Fengshan was drunk and felt uncomfortable for a while, and she might regret it for a long time if she is not drunk. In the end, Song Yushao was an old river and lake. In fact, he drank more than Song Fengshan, but he was still not very drunk, but his face flushed, and he hiccuped with alcohol to persuade Fengshan and Qin Pingan to drink less. Fortunately, Fengshan said drunk and fell asleep. But after all, Qin Pingan is now a man with a wife. If he drank a lot of meat and vegetables today, he would ask Ning Yao to find someone under the table at that time. Wouldn't he drink the next wine? It's just that Qin Pingan's drinker is really good. Song Yushao drank to the end, and saw that the guy's eyes were bright when he drank. There was no such thing as a drunk drunkard. The old man had no choice but to convince him, and he had to take the initiative to cover the bowl and said it's just like this today. It's really impossible to drink anymore. My grandchildren and daughters-in-law are very strict. I drank half a year's share of drinks in one meal today. What's more, I have to go to Huanghe Water Mansion to have a wedding tonight. I can't go and just drink tea. It's not plausible always have to hang over with wine. Qin Pingan said that after drinking and going to Tsai country, he must hurry up and do business immediately so he can't stay here. Song Yushao laughed and said that it is important to be busy with business affairs. Next time you will have a drink and enjoy yourself, whether it is in Luapa Mountain or here, get a hot pot and divide it thoroughly. When Qin Pingan got up, he swayed and Song Yushao slowly got up, pressing his fingers against the tabletop. His figure would be more stable. As for Song Fengshan, he was already lying on the table. Song Yushao picked up the yellow bamboo scabbard and threw it to Qin Pingan across a wine table. He smiled and said, "I'm here for you." Taking the scabbard, Qin Pingan walked out of the house and went to the courtyard. Qin Pingan and Ning Yao said goodbyes to the old man and Lu Qian who had helped Song Gaofeng. Yufeng left, but within dozens of miles Qin Pingan suddenly reached out and covered it. I shut my mouth and landed in a hurry. I wanted to reach out to help a tree. When my hand fell and my head hit the tree, I simply touched my forehead against the tree trunk and vomited wildly. Ning Yao stood aside and reached out to pat his back. Helplessly said, "Death to face." In her impression, Qin Pingan had never been drunk after drinking, let alone vomiting. Qin Pingan didn't even shake off his alcohol and drunk his drunkenness, so he let Ning Yao walk a few steps with him because of his drunkenness, and when he was relieved, he went to Tsai country. Ning Yao walked with him on the mountain path, walking slowly, wearing a blue shirt swaying. She had to reach out and support his arm. The drunk man gently called her name, Ning Yao, Ning Yao. She couldn't laugh or cry and had to respond again and again. On the other side of the house, the old man sat back at the wine table, smiling, looking out the door. The new generation of people in the arena often persuade people to drink just to see the ugliness of people after being drunk. Lao Jianghu, because he doesn't have enough alcohol, he will persuade his friends to drink enough. Or when there is no shortage of drinks, the reason to persuade the wine is to listen to a few words in your heart. Maybe every old river and lake is like a wine jar, filled with a kind of wine called Once Upon a Time. When I arrived at the house in Keiguo, I saw the couple Xuanhuan and Yingying. Qin Pingan did not drink this time, but took Ning Yao to the grave to toast, and then returned to the house to sit for a while. After leaving the house, Qin Pingan glanced back. 40 years are like wiping. In the rivers and lakes, many deceased people have gone, only the story stays, like a boat seeking a sword. In the Rouge County of Tsai country, a young female cultivator named Lu Gaoxin, as a direct disciple of the goddess Zong, has been a consecrate to Tsai country for several years after she descended the mountain. She is actually not very old and her face is still young, but she has a look haggard and gray hair. Tonight she sat on the roof, drank a pot of wine, put the pot on her feet, and took off a homemade bamboo flute around her waist. The bright moon hung high and the flute whimpered. Life is like a dream, in the middle of the moon in the flute and the body in the wine. She leaned back, lay on the roof, raised her hand, and gently shook a string of silver bells on her wrist. In the sound of the bells, it seemed that someone was passing by. Just with the clear and melodious ding-dong sound, I will not stay. She glanced at the full moon, the most pitiful heaven and moon. Wei Wei, the goddess of the mountain, goddess of the country of combing water, was so bored today, taking advantage of the absence of pilgrims in the middle of the night. She sat on the steps and took out from her sleeves the book of landscape travels with constant adventures. She was happy and never bored. It's a pity that the mountain bookseller didn't reprint this book of travels on mountains and rivers, and there was no longer the pages of the painted fairy books that Wei Wei had been waiting for. The two goddesses who accompanied the goddess of the mountain to read the book together. One, her eyes lit up, she blurted out and said the word faithful. Wei Wei raised his head, puzzled. Why, you don't know a lot of characters, teach me to read and read? A woman in palace dress, she is short in stature, but has a very round charm. Today she left the capital to visit Changchun Palace again. Back then, I was driven out of the capital and had to cultivate here. Therefore what I saw and heard was bleak, chilly, and the flowers would fade away no matter how beautiful they bloomed. Now I look at them everywhere, but they are picturesque and pleasing to the eye. The Queen Mother, who is expensive by mother and son, is now the most powerful woman on the continent of Aquarius. Two sons, one is the Emperor Dali, who is destined to be named forever, and the other is the king of the Dali domain, who has made great achievements in the war. The brothers have survived the war together. As for who is the real Song Mu and who is Song He, does it matter? Anyway, on her side it was only important once and she was heartbroken about it, but now it is not important. Feudal King Song Mu, the companion capital of Dadu Bank, except for the title of emperor, how different from the emperor. There are even 6 yamen. It's time to be content and I can't ask for more. When she visited Changchun Palace this time, in addition to a few monks who accompanied the army to worship the royal family, she was also accompanied by an old monk from the Qin Tianjian. At this moment, the supreme elder of Changchun Palace sat with him on one side. Behind the Empress Dowager, there was only a woman who looked like a maid holding a sword. She was graceful but covered her face with her natal water method. It is a pity that Dali failed to save Chao Rong and served as an offering to the Song family. This man of Didao, who lived in the mountains of the old Dashuang dynasty for many years, is said to be one of the direct disciples of the 3 masters of Baiyujing, and the brother of Xiaoliang, the Qingliang sect of Luzhou and Beiju. Chao Rong lived in the old dragon city and the companion capital. The battlefield, many shots, extremely eye-catching. Then there was Pu Yen, the bone swordsman, a female crown from the sword house of the upside-down mountain master, who was unable to be attracted by Dali, and the war ended and quietly left. In an Aquarius island, in that battle, strange people and strangers appeared in endlessly, and there was a great atmosphere of that group of fish leaping over the dragon gate. The only problem is that these gods on the mountain have a peaceful relationship with His Majesty the Emperor, but they are quite close to the companion. As for the old southern vassals who had healed their scars and forgotten their pain, she really didn't pay attention to them, but she had a near-term worry in front of her. The pavilion by the cliff, the old man in charge of the Qin Tianjian, was talking to the Empress Dowager about the transfer of martial arts in that country. She frowned. Mainly in the south of Dadu, several 9-level martial arts have appeared one after another, including long-famous masters in the far-reaching world, and a few new faces who turned out to be born. In addition, some young martial artists of the 3 realms of refining gods. The Department of Criminal Affairs of Dali is secretly recorded, with detailed records of his name, birthplace, teacher's biography, and landscape history. On the other hand, in Dada North, especially the native Wufu of Dali, if you only talk about the superficial things, then in the last 2 decades, it seems a bit lackluster. Dali Qin Tianjian smiled bitterly about this. It was not only because Song Changjing condensed the martial arts from one continent back then, but the bigger problem was that of the old Lizhu Cave, a place called Luapa Mountain. Even if the unreasonable mountain lord Qin Pingan is not to be discussed, Pei Qian, a disciple who travels to various continents under the pseudonym Zheng Qian, is already in 9 realms, besides Zhu Lian, Chongqiu, Lu Baixiang, Wei Xian. Which one is not the master of martial arts? What's more, there are a pair of sisters and brothers in the Yang family shop in the small town, a female Sudian with the nickname Rouge, and Shirling Mountain from Taoya Alley. The senior sister is the bottleneck of the golden body, and the junior brother is already the warrior of the far travel boundary. However, according to the secret records of the 2 archives of Dali Li and Xing, Sudian's qualifications, roots, and character are better. It was the first time that the Supreme Elder of Changchun Palace knew the inside story of these mountains, and she almost felt unstable when she heard it. Is the Luapa Mountain near Piyun Mountain already among the sects? Why is there no news about such a big event? And that young mountain lord who is not confused, is already a 10-level martial artist? Weibo has hosted so many night banquets, how can he keep hiding the matter? Seeing that the Empress Dowager was obviously displeased, the old man of Qin Tianjian carefully brewed some words and said, with regard to martial arts, there has always been a saying that the martial artist of the 3 realms of refining God will die in his own country, and the martial artist of the end will die in this continent. Luapa Mountain has this background. Although the strong martial arts are so condensed in one place, it is too weird, but it is not all a bad thing. In fact, it is still in the Wall of Flowers. After all, in the boundary of Longzhou, it is within the mainland of Dali Mountain and River. Gui nodded for the lady of the Empress Dowager Dali, and the old monk sensibly got up and left. She stood up, and the Changchun Palace Supreme Elder was about to follow her up. Without turning her head, she just stretched out her hand and pressed it, and the latter immediately sat back to her position. She looked out the mountain, frowning. The old grudge between Xinjiang Mountain and Luapa Mountain, the 2 new Jin sects, seemed to be destined to be unwilling. Otherwise, Piyun Mountain would not help the Luapa Mountain to hide and tuck in this way. If it was replaced with a general mountain, it would have been impatient for a long time to show the heritage of the martial art. In fact, in her opinion, what was the turmoil that happened in the sky of Liju Cave back then? You, Qin Pingan, are both the sword fairy of the upper 5 realms, and even the master of a sect, so why bother about it? As for your friend Lu Xianyang, he didn't die but a blessing in disguise. After returning from a study tour in Nanpasuazhou, the Qin family became the heir of Saint Ruan and sword sect of Longquan. Why bother to ask for an explanation with Yuan Jinya, who was enshrined by Xinjiang Mountain? She turned her head and asked. The imperial court came forward to mediate and help Xinjiang Mountain to ease the cheeks. For example, try to let Yuan Jinya go down the mountain, visit Luapa Mountain, apologize, pay a gift? The woman standing next to the Empress Dowager was Xianhuan, the of water, who quietly left her jurisdiction. She shook her head, wore a golden spike-long sword on her waist and whispered, the slave and maid returned to the mother, don't say the current Xinjiang Mountain will not agree to this matter. Qin Pingying and Lu Xianyang also don't think they can expose it in such a sum. She stretched out her hand and patted Tingzhu, angrily said, if you are together you will be hurt, and it may even be the result of both losers. Both of these are sects, so they don't even understand this simple truth? Yanghua was silent. Some questions have long been answered by the person who asked them. The woman sneered, well, there are just these 2 sections. At this moment I am still busy choosing a site for the next sect. Or Qin Pingan and Zhu Huang, the 2 sword immortals, think that they have become sect masters. Crossing the river and demolishing the bridge, you can have the ability to ignore my Dali. Yanghua said, Manny, they are making a big fuss. In fact, it is not all bad for us, Dali. If both sides abandon their previous suspicions, each expands too fast, but it is very easy to give birth to right and wrong. The woman turned her palm into a fist and tapped the pavilion column lightly. Yanghua continued, especially the lost mountain of Qin Pingan, where the clouds cover the mist, hidden deep and rise too fast. In addition, this person is one of the 10 young people in the world, especially the sword spirit. The last hermit of the Great Wall still formed alliances in Luzhou, Beiju. If you are not careful, you will get a big tail. Maybe in 100 years, it will be difficult for anyone to restrain the mountain. The woman stretched out her finger and rubbed her eyebrows. We, Mr. Wei Dashin, really caused me a lot of trouble. Regarding Wei Bo, she was still willing to look at him with admiration, a little more polite. After all, Piyun Mountain and Deus National Fate are in a close relationship. In these years, Wei Bo, as the monarch of Beiwei Mountain, has done so that the court can't fault it. The Ministry of Rights, the Ministry of Justice, and officials who frequented Piyun Mountain all spoke highly of the monarch and spoke bluntly. Among the 5 sacred mountains, Wei Bo acted the most decently, because he was old-fashioned and elegant in his conversation. Know the rules of officialdom best. Besides, Wei Bo still has a handle held in his hand by Dali in this Changchun Palace. Song Yuzhang, serving as a mountain god, is the meaning of the first emperor. Yang Hua, the maidservant beside her, has become the righteous of the river in the danger, which is her arrangement. She suddenly turned her head and smiled. Yang Hua, now I am the Empress Dowager, you are the goddess of water, are all empresses? Yang Hua knelt down immediately and said nothing. The long sword was put aside. The woman smiled and walked around behind Yang Hua. She gently lifted her foot and kicked Yang Hua's rounded arc, jokingly, Such a beautiful woman, but she doesn't show her face to others. It's a violent thing. She felt a little bit self-satisfied and she reached out and touched her cheek. Unlike me, there is no fruit in cultivating, so I can only fight against the bronze mirror hairpin. It's hard to keep the old flavor. Her eyes suddenly sharpened. This Chin Pingon, if you dare to overdo it, don't give Dolly a little bit of face and dare to turn over the old account casually, then don't blame my Dolly for being rude to Luopashan. The elders of the Changchun Palace were thrilled. The woman suddenly laughed, turned around, bent down, covered her heavy chest with one hand, and patted Yanghua's head with one hand. Get up, don't be like a puppy. Yanghua picked up the long sword on the ground, stood up respectfully, and stood aside again holding the sword. The woman sat back on the bright yellow embroidered dragon mat and suddenly asked, Yanghua, do you have a landscape painting of that young mountain owner? I don't remember exactly what he looked like, I just remember that he was a sour and thin back then. Black mud legs. Yanghua nodded, took out a scroll from her sleeve, and spread it gently on the stone table. The woman was very surprised, tapping the scroll lightly with a finger, looking at the sword-backed green shirt in the painting. Tiske exclaimed, I only heard that the female Big 18 has changed. How can a man change so much? Is it because of going up the mountain to cultivate the Tao? The woman lay on the table, thought for a while, took out a piece of broken porcelain from her sleeve, and then called the old monk of the Qintianjian to let him find the young master of Luapa Mountain and see what she was doing now. The old monk was embarrassed. After all, this matter was too taboo. The woman smiled and said, He is not in the fairyland, he will only be unaware of it. We can quickly remove the formation after seeing it. The old monk had no choice but to do what he ordered, and began to set up the formation, and finally used the piece of broken porcelain as the center of the formation, using his magical powers, watching the mountains and rivers from afar, and the mist rising, and finally a young Taoist man appeared in the pavilion. At this moment, it seems to be on the top of a mountain, overlooking the scenery. I saw the man wearing a lotus crown on his head, holding a white jade Ganoderma lucidum, gently tapping the palm of his hand, wearing a simple and elegant green gauze robe, stepping on a flying cloud shoe and carrying a bamboo yellow scabbard long sword. The woman tilted her head, as if she couldn't imagine that the boy in the low alley would become such a person. The next moment, her heart shook, and she saw the young Taoist priest, who looked up as if looking at her. He squinted and smiled, raised his hand with white jade Ganoderma and gently wiped his neck. Xinjiang Mountain Egret Crossing. A genealogy immortal master named Chao Amo in the Xinjia and named Gyunla asked for a room or a room with a letter. Just report Zhou Shou's name directly without spending money, because this house will be bought directly for 1 year, otherwise Xinjiang Mountain is holding a big celebration now, there is no room left for the guests, otherwise, let alone the Jiship room of this Xinjiang, ordinary monks on the mountain, do not have the ability to live in Xinjiang Mountain. Everywhere in the Xinjia mansion, even the surrounding 2 county inns, are crowded with masters from all directions. In the moonlight, Chin Pingon moved a bamboo and rattan lounge chair and sat on the observation deck with a wide view, overlooking the Qinggu Peak, gently shaking the sword gourd in his hand. In 3 days it will be an auspicious day. It is a celebration for the great sage Xuanhuan who moved to the mountain to enshrine one of the 5 realms. It is a family of immortals with the head of the ancestor, and the number of swords is like a cloud. It is said that Xinjiang Mountain Xiazong site selection of the old Zhuang dynasty has been finalized. Then Xinjiang Mountain will soon become the first sect to establish the Xiazong in Aquarius. These time-honored sects of Jianghu Mountain are now. Ning Yao didn't follow here, she went straight back to Luapa Mountain. Chin Pingon used a series of reasons such as asking Jian Xinjiang Mountain, should no one suppress the battle? Besides, I just received a letter from Cui Dongshan from Feijin, that wife Tianwan has hooked up with Bai Chang. That is a sword repairman who can enter the Ascended Realm anytime and anywhere. He and Lu Xianying are 2 just in case. What should I do when I meet Bai Chang who is so mysterious? But Ning Yao did not agree. It's just that Bai Chang really wants to hide in Xinjiang Mountain. If she dares to take out the sword, she will come. Actually, Chin Pingon must be blamed for eating tofu in a hurry. She used to be on the Jingling Mountain Road before, taking advantage of the lack of people around, drunk and courageous, but when Ning Yao broke free she went to Keiguo Road. Pay attention to him. Chen Pingon withdrew his gaze, no longer looked at the Qinggu Peak, pursed his lips and narrowed his eyes with a smile. I have never seen such a shy Ning Yao, timid even for a moment, blushing like a peach blossom. Chen Pingon, don't keep a sword gourd around his waist, what else to drink? The immortal master Chao Mo, who appeared at the Bailudu, traveled far away with his sword on his back, a crown of lotus flower, and a robe of green yarn. He is really a man full of moral energy and ethereal wind. Even the female cultivator in the xianxia who was in charge of hospitality and recording files doubted whether this Taoist real person was someone from outside the world who deliberately refused to stay in the fairy mansion of the peaks of Xinjiang Mountain. Chen Pingan lay on the chair, closed his eyes and rested, half asleep and half awake until dawn. The next day Chen Pingan still did not wait for Lu Xianying, but the entire egret crossing was alarmed by one person. All the guests who passed the Yunlu lean on the railing or the window, looking at the famous Jianxiu from a distance. Finally come. In fact, a small percentage of the immortal genealogists and Yamazawa Naxiu who came to join in the fun were all rushing to this person, just to try their luck and see with their own eyes the most likely questioning sword of this person. The owner of Fenglei Garden, sword repairs the Yellow River. The inn was noisy, whispering everywhere. The centuries-long grievance between Xinjiang Mountain and Fenglei Garden has been talked about by the monks on the Aquarius Mountain for more than a century? Why Yuan Bai asked Jianfeng Lei Yuan. The entire Aquarius Island knew it well. But Yuan Bai was severely injured, and he was destined to be unable to break through this life, but he still only delayed the Yellow River's breakthrough. Lituanjing Weijin Yellow River. It is recognized that Aquarius Island has the best sword practice qualifications for thousands of years. Chen Pingan also sat up and looked at the Jianxiu who appeared at Bailudu, Li Tuanjing's big disciple and Lu Bakio Sr. The first time I saw this person was on the intercontinental ferry at Dajiashan. With the help of mirror flowers, water and moon, I was able to watch the sword of the Fengshui temple Shengxiantai. Chen Pingan was very impressed by the Yellow River because this person was extremely sharp in his sword. The sword heart of the fairy Su Jiao was broken. At that time Chen Pingan was in a low realm. He was just a layman watching the excitement. After he truly became a sword repairman, when he looked back, he would understand that the person in the Yellow River would already be in the Yupu realm if he was in the Great Wall of Sword Qi, and he was qualified to be Mihu. Yu Qing is an alternate to the peak sword immortal. The arrival of the Yellow River, the unexpected and reasonable appearance of the egret crossing, made the festive atmosphere of Xinjiang Mountain suddenly stagnant. For a time, the flying swords and magic techniques continued to spread the news, and the news was quickly passed on. However, outside the gate of the patriarch of the first-line peak, the sovereign Xuanhuan is standing side by side with the white-clothed old ape at this moment. The two Yupu realms, one smiled lightly and confidently, and the other sneered and sneered. At present, Xinjiang Mountain is full of talents, and the peaks are full of immortal masters, emperors and gods from the mountains and rivers. Some people have been amazed, saying that outside the battlefield, Xinjiang Mountain today can be regarded as the place with the most gathering places. For example, Qi Zhen Tianjun of God's Immortal Zone took his direct disciples and personally came to Xinjiang Mountain and settled on the first-line peak of Zhu Mountain. A young gentleman from the Jiang family in Yunlin, who is said to be the next master of the Jiang family, and Jiang Yun of the same generation as well as a woman from the Jiang family who married the old Longqing Fu family, have arrived at Xinjiang Mountain and lived with them. At the top of the peak of Patriarch Xia Yuansui, the new lord of the True Realm School of Shijianhu, the immortal Lu Laoqing, was promoted to the chief dedicated to Lu Jimao of the Jade Realm, and the second dedicated to Li Fuyu. The three also showed up together, came to congratulate and stayed at Yunfeng. Even the king of Zhongyue Mountain, Jin Qing, had negotiated with the court of Dei, and finally settled down on Xiefeng. In Qingfeng City, which also ranks among the sects, the head of the Su family lives in Feng Tu, Tao Yanba with his wife and children, as well as the son-in-law of a son of Yuan family in Xiangzhou Kingdom. It is said that there is also a hunting envoy, Chao Ping, on the side of the Dali court, who will visit Xinjiang Mountain with the Shangshu of the Ministry of Rites of the capital. The old mountain lord of Yunxia Mountain and a very young nascent soul monk, now Kai Jinjian, the female ancestor of Yunxia Mountain, also came to Xinjiang Mountain. Not to mention the large and small emperors and monarchs around Xinjiang Mountain, all left the capital one after another, and along the way they encountered a lot of landscape gods. Probably the only inadequacy is Fengshui Temple, Jinwu Mountain and Longquan Sword Sect. None of these three forces came to congratulate them. Chen Pingan suddenly got up from the wicker chair and came to the railing in an instant. When he held the white jade Ganoderma lucidum and did that action. Obviously, the other party immediately got rid of some magical powers of looking at mountains and rivers. Su Hun was standing at the railing of the tall building of the mansion. This Qingfeng city lord didn't think that Huang He asked the sword today to succeed. The big and small Gushan mountains are collectively called the Zhuanlu Peak. There is a woman who was quietly brought back to the teacher's gate. She has a beautiful appearance. Standing on the cliff of Xiaogu Mountain, the Long Ti is standing, her face pale and colorless, but she adds a bit of beauty, inspiring. Outside the Patriarch Hall, the Emperor Zhu smiled and said, "With the temper of the Yellow River, at least you have to hand a sword to our Patriarch Hall before you are willing to leave." The old ape in white sneered with his arms around his chest, "It's best to add Qin Pingan and Lu Xianying to ask the sword together." Sure enough, as the Emperor of Bamboo had expected, the Yellow River came out of the sword, but one sword after another, the peaks of Xinjiang Mountain were questioned one by one. On the side of the first-line peak, the Lord Xuanhuan personally took the sword to dispel the sword light, and the rest of the peaks, their respective mountain protection formations were opened instantly, and then the old sword immortals took the sword based on this. In addition, some experts who were guests of Xinjiang Mountain, all helped to take the next sword. The old ape in white asked, "I will meet him for a while?" The Emperor Bamboo smiled and said, "Zongman is overjoyed, let's not fight and kill, let him go. Otherwise, it will not sound good, saying that there are many people in Xinjiang Mountain and bullying a junior who is only in the nascent soul stage." The Yellow River stood in place for a while, and saw that no sword repairman appeared in Xinjiang Mountain. He left without a trace. He said that he would come again next time, and only asked the ancestor of the sword front-line peak. Qin Pingan lay back in the wicker chair and breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he didn't make a big fight. In the middle of the night, Lu Xianying took the ferry to Bailudu leisurely, and found Qin Pingan in the Jiazafang of the Yinlu building. He cursed and said that the Yellow River was too much. "I also moved a wicker chair for myself." Lu Xianying lay on the side, holding the back of his head with his hands, looking at the bright starry sky, and asked with a smile, "How can I ask the sword?" Qin Pingan thought for a while and said, "Just climb from the foot of the mountain and then take out the sword. I will sit on the side of the Patriarch Hall of the frontline peak and sit and drink tea and wait for you slowly." Sword of Coming Chapter 8:18. Lian Xing River, green peaks are like clusters, and the fairy houses on the tops of Xinjiang Mountain in the distance seem to have old sword immortals calling for friends and friends. They are holding private gatherings, candles everywhere, reflecting like a city of fire. The stars in the sky shift, and the wine glasses on earth turn, pleasing to the eye. 3 watch lights and 5 watch chickens are when they are studying and practicing sword. At the Xianjiao and nearest to Qinghu Peak, Qin Pingan and Lu Xianying are lying in the wicker chairs to enjoy the cool air. Lu Xianying has already been slumbering while Qin Pingan has nothing to do. Qin Pingan closed the book and put in his sleeve. He whispered softly, "It's time for the sun." According to Taoism, there is the mysterious saying, when the sun is a sun fire 216, the cultivator chooses this time to practice, tempers the body and fumigates. Jin Dan, full of yin and pure yang with a beautiful appearance. According to the white-haired boy, one of the 10 young candidates, Wang Liyuan, the rice thief, was originally an unknown Taoist document, but he accidentally picked up an abandoned Taoist book. Follow this method to practice harmony in the mountains and rivers, and raise thousands of profound beads. When you gain the Tao, there is an opportunity for the fog to clear the sun, Yuming's weather. This wording is naturally a memory that Wu Shuangjiang gave to Dealu in the night ship. It can make Wu Shuangjiang, who is good at soldering all things and turning them into his own use, evaluate so high than this Wang Liyuan. It is not surprising. Will definitely be a hero in the future Qingming world, provided that Bai Yujing's second head teacher should not be targeted. Now in 100 years, it happens to be the second Taoist who is in charge of Bai Yujing and is responsible for monitoring the world. Qin Pingan guessed that Wang Liyuan might have quietly rushed to Wuxia. The world, wait until the gate reopens, wait until Lu Qin abbot Bai Yujing's affairs, and then return to Qingming world. Lu Xianying opened his eyes, rubbed his face, yawned, changed a comfortable posture, curled up with his hands in his sleeves, couldn't help complaining. The gifted time? Wouldn't it have to wait more than 10 hours? I'm here later, I'm not at home here. Mizu has to live alone in a shop by the river. She is timid. What if she knocks on the door by the water ghost in the middle of the night? Qin Pingan put his hands on his abdomen, looked at the galaxy hanging on the sky and smiled. Crying you is not a little brave. Lu Xianying smiled and said, Ms. You and I are a perfect match. Qin Pingan nodded, stood up and walked to the railing to overlook the ferry. Even in the middle of the night, there are still Xinjia ferry boats on the side of Egret Ferry. So once Qinggu Peak changes the peak owner, and Yuerong doesn't want to go to Qiulingfeng to practice, she has to find another way out, such as the Zhuyu Peak, which was laughed at by Xinjiang Mountain's young and old swordsmen, as the bird does not stand. Xiefeng with only a pair of masters and servants is actually pretty good. Wei Yueshan is relatively good at being a human being, can earn money, he can be mixed everywhere. The peaks of Xinjiang Mountain are actually willing to accept this wealthy egret to take care of his duties. In recent years, he and the customs are the old swordsmen of the upper 5 realms. Xia Yuansui often walked around. Wei Yueshan sent out 2 pieces just from the small arsenal on the mountain, and almost all of his family was gone. Therefore, the Emperor Zhu had a lot of opinions on this person, and he had not been among the 5 realms before. I will endure Wei Yushan's snobbery. At the moment, the Emperor Bamboo must have made up his mind to let Wei Yueshan hand over the fat of the egret crossing, and take over the egret crossing in the future. There are several candidates in the heart of the Emperor Bamboo, one of whom is an alternate. My old friend is Lu Jingchun, who was in Zhuqiangzifeng a few years ago. From Fulu Street to Qingfeng City to Xinjiang Mountain, go around turns around, the world is so small, it seems that I can always meet acquaintances. As for the disputes between Wei Yueshan and Ni Yuerong, those smoky grievances and hatreds, I won't say much, anyway these two are not important figures. Lu Xianying's head hurt when he heard this series of inside stories. Lu Xianying really didn't bother to remember some of these things. Qin Pingan was enough to be the accountant. He was born as a treasurer and master, so he just joked, "Why don't you be a storyteller?" Qin Pingan turned around and smiled, "You think you can make money as a storyteller?" "Nothing. I haven't worked in the Great Wall of Jianghu. As a result, it is difficult to cheat a few coins from the child." Lu Xianying sat up and said, "You have remembered so many messy things, why do you want to help Xinjiang Mountain to repair the family tree?" Qin Pingan rubbed his chin, "If the first-line peak is willing to spend money and pay a high price, I really have no objection." Lu Xianying lay back in the wicker chair and said, "They are here." Qin Pingan smiled and walked into the house to open the door to welcome the guests. Because the sword of the Yellow River at Bailudu, a sword light divided into 19 points, and at the same time the sword fell on the peaks. Although the thunder is heavy and the rain is small, the sword light will be scattered to all the local sword immortals and congratulating guests in the mountains. Wei Yueshan smiled bitterly and immediately reminded the younger sister, "Don't annoy this person, let's end it." Chao Amo is very likely to be related to the fairy Chao Rong, who is rumored to be the ancestor of Bai Yujing's 3 head teachers. Ni Yuerong immediately asked senior brother in his heart, or let's breathe with the gods and ask about 1 or 2. Now Qi Zhen, the great heavenly sovereign, and a few high sword talismans passed down from the ancestors, are staying at the first-line peak of Zushan Mountain. At that time the Lord Xuanhuan came down to welcome guests. At the gate of the mountain to meet Qi Tianjun and his entourage Gaozhen. As for the Fairy of the Gods, naturally there is no need to stop at the Bailudu, just go straight to the first line of peaks. Wei Yueshan was about to answer the younger sister, but in the corner of his eyes, he saw Chao Amo with a smile, as if everything was silent. Wei Yueshan knew in his heart, and immediately took his junior sister to leave. For this matter, Fei Jin sent a letter to the frontline peak to harass God sect Qi Tianjun. It was a big joke. Qi Zhen is the leader of Immortal Master Yizhou, and then the young man on Xinjiang Mountain, the little white egret crosses the Cloud Tower, a Dragon Gate realm, a Seaview realm, 2 little monks covered in bronze, ask the noble heavenly monarch, whether there is a name under the fairy Chao Rongman in the 3 lines of Baiyujing Taoist priest named Chao Amo. Besides, in the Aquarius Island, except for the unreasonable Yuanying sword fairy like Fengliu and Huanghe, who would come to provoke Xinjiang Mountain after eating. Even if you lose your mind and have the courage, do you have the ability? Qin Pingan closed the door, turned and walked back to the viewing platform. Lu Xianying raised his head, "I thought I needed to go out myself. It's all people's hearts that have always been like this." Qin Pingan took out the white jade Ganoderma lucidum from his sleeve and patted the palms of his hands lightly, as if he was scrutinizing people's hearts. "In fact, it would be a good thing if I was noticed that something was wrong with the Cloud Tower. Doing similar things again, you can be more cautious and strive to keep dripping water. Many regrets, as far as its strength can be, just because I did not expect it, I will regret it afterwards. But this time I live here, I actually did not deliberately want to hide my identity. Before you came, I was the only one to stay here, nothing to do, just treat it as a joke." Lu Xianying asked, "Why come here a few days in advance?" Qin Pingan began to lie down on a wicker chair, closing his eyes and taking a nap. After a moment of silence he replied softly, "I was worried that the Shanshui Dibao officially lifted the ban after the Confucian Temple discussion was over. I have entrusted my husband a long time ago to help hide his identity, so a deputy leader gave some hints during the discussions. After not allowing outsiders to leave the Confucian Temple, he would easily talk about the inside story of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, and the mountain monks who participated in the discussions of the Confucian temple. They are all extremely clever people, so I don't know how to reveal my hidden official status, especially my name, but am afraid in case. Once you talk to Xinjiang Mountain who asks the sword, it's no longer just nipping Lanqian. Pinyin, it will lose a lot of meaning. Besides, I stayed here early just sitting here looking at the peaks of Xinjiang Mountain from a distance, the sword energy rushing into the sky like the sun. At night, in the evening, the fairy master Yufeng has a lot of stature like a firefly in the summer night, and he can help him cultivate his heart and soul, and he will use it as a warning from time to time on the road in the future. Lu Xianying put his head on the back of his hand, raised Erlang's legs, swayed lightly and smiled. You are born to work, and you are destined to be less comfortable than I am for the rest of your life. Qin Pingan said, I've never been afraid of being busy with hope. The more busy I usually become, the more at ease I am. I'm afraid of things that I can only ask for in case. Since the first time I left home, the reason why I am so busy just to stop being so busy. Lu Xianying gave a hum and asked casually, did you see a little slug during the Confucian temple discussion? Qin Pingan shook his head. In Panshui County I walked to the door. I originally wanted to see him. After listening to the preaching of Mr. Zheng from Beidasheng, I didn't see him. I just took a walk with Mr. Zheng. Lu Xianying tweeted, walking with Zheng Juzhong? It's a beautiful scenery, I envy you. Qin Pingan looked helpless and shook his head. I am envious, in fact I feel so worried all the way if I can, I don't want to in my life. There is any intersection with Mr. Zheng. Don't you know that during a confrontation between two monks, Mr. Zheng directly killed 2 of the upper 5 who were on Toyua Mountain at the time in front of 2 monks on the top of the world? A monk of the demon race. I now doubt whether Mr. Zheng has also been to the steward of Liju Cave, Fulu Street or Taoya Lane Nursing Yard, shopkeeper buddy, dragon kiln master kiln worker? Man woman? Will it actually appear next to us early in the morning, have a face-to-face chat? Who knows? Lu Xianying raised a palm and said with emotion, you said that there are so many gods and people in such a small place in our hometown. Lu Xianying closed his fists and laughed at himself. When I was a child, I always felt that the sky and the earth outside were big. I went out and took a look. I never figured out the far door, and then I returned home, only to find that the palm-sized hometown is actually very strange, as if I have never known it. Qin Pingan smiled and said, well, my hometown. Based on the relationship between the Song clan of Dei and Xinjiang Mountain, it is reasonable to say that Qin Pingan's identity should not be concealed. Anyway, it is a secret letter. What can be said clearly in a few words? Why watch going up to Yixianfeng? It seems to be kept in the dark. Qi Zhen lightly placed his son on the chessboard and said, the relationship between Song Changjing and the Queen Mother of Dei is very delicate. This is like the relationship between Dei capital and the accompanying capital. To put it simply, Song Changjing was helping the Dali court and the woman to separate the relationship. Based on this, tell Qin Pinyin, the young hermit of the Downfall Mountain, that some grievances on the mountain should be resolved on the mountain, not down the mountain. Gao Jianfu, the Taoist immortal who was known as the Golden Boy and Jade Girl together with He Xiaoyang in the past, has a complicated expression. Qi Jin raised his head. Why look forward to the appearance of that hidden official? Gao Jianfu nodded. If Qin Pingan Wenjian succeeds in this, I will convince him and admit that I am inferior to others. From now on, I will have no worries and just practice with peace of mind. Qi Jin smiled and said, knowing how to find yourself down the stairs, not to go to the tip of the horns, is also regarded as a secret method of spiritual cultivation on the mountain. Gao Jianfu asked, if he really dares to choose this kind of juncture to ask the sword Xinjiang Mountain, can he really succeed? Or learn from Fengliu and Yellow River, click until the end, and Luapa Mountain will use this to tell a continent. Slowly figure it out? Qi Jin said, it is difficult to ask the sword, but it is not completely impossible. But once Qin Pings asks the sword, he will never be very casual. A young man who can become the last hermit of the Great Wall of Jianxi, neither purely inspiring, nor do something stupid. Jun Jinqing of Zhongyue Mountain stands with Jianxiu Yuanbai in a high-rise corridor facing Xiefeng. Yuanbai smiled bitterly. Jin Shan should not come to Xinjiang Mountain this time. It is easy to be accounted for by the Dali Song family. Jin Qing said indifferently, why do I become this mountain monarch? Yuanbai didn't know it? Yuanbai said, it is precisely because he is clear that Yuanbai hopes that Lord Jin Shan can sit in the mountains and rivers of his home country for a long time. Jin Qing glanced at the genius sword repairman who had stopped on the road and said regretfully, as a citizen of old Zhuing, what you have done is worthy of a clear conscience, but in my opinion as a sword repairer, it is a pity that you have fallen here. Xinjiang Mountain does things too unnaturally. If I can't come this time, you might even face Yefeng. I can't keep it, just because of the tempers of people like Emperor Zhu Huang and Xiaoyuan Sui. Maybe when the next site is successfully selected, they will follow the boat, saying that they will let you return to your hometown. In fact, they will be Shuyuan Jianjian. Make the best use of the white things not only to please me but also to attract sword repair embryos in the old Zhuing territory under your banner. As for Yuan Bei's life and death, his reputation in Zheng Yangshan's view, is not important at all. Yuan Bei said, the sword repair embryos of the children of the old country, as long as they can cultivate early on the mountain, my personal gains and losses are not worth mentioning. The more the sword fairy embryo, the more time is lost, the more disastrous the consequences will be. The later the mountaineering and sword practice, the slower the step. Yuan Bei looked at the snow-covered mountain on the opposite side, and said softly, I hope that one day the old Zhu Ying's children can occupy several peaks on Xinjiang Mountain, hug each other and not allow outsiders to insult. Jin Qing hesitated. The heartfelt words said, Lu Laoqing found me earlier. He said that it was from the realm sect's upper sect. The Lord Wei Ying intended to make a pen trade with Xinjiang Mountain. In exchange, Wei Ying wanted to recruit you. Specific exchange conditions, what price will be paid, Lu Laoqing did not elaborate, so I want to hear your opinion. Do you have any ideas about leaving Xinjiang Mountain? As long as you nod your head, I will be responsible for discussing the matter with Lu Laoqing and Emperor Bamboo, so you don't have to show up. When Jin Qing said this, he was very pleased. It is rare to be regarded as such a great sword fairy like Wei Ying. Wei Ying is a man of great talent and vision. Wei Ying, Wei Jin, and Bai Chong are now the leaders of Sanzhou Jianxiu, and all three of them are very likely to make further progress and one day ascend to the ascent. As a great mountain monarch on a continent, Jin Qing is good at the art of looking at qi, and he still has this vision. Yuan Bai was stunned, and then there was some smile in his eyes, and he couldn't help but said, Jin Shanjun is digging the foot of the wall this time? With arms around his chest, Jin Qing sneered and said, otherwise, congratulate Xinjiang Mountain? I didn't even bring any gifts. I came empty-handed. The god of wealth Tao Yanba, Tao Zi, the old ape in white, the couple of the Su family and King Fengqing, and the son Su Binxian. 6 people gathered in Qiuling Mountain, where Tao Jia's ancestors were located. Qiuling Mountain is the treasure of Feng Shui, second only to the first-line peaks among the peaks of Xinjiang Mountain. It is even more suitable for Taoism and sword practice than Shimo Peak in Xiaoyuan Sui. Tao Zi has grown into a slim woman. Su Binxian also looks like a Sua family member. In his early years, there was a Taoist lady who wandered to Qingfeng City and personally gave a name to the infant Su Binxian. Su Hun said that Ruan Qiong had a good eye for choosing apprentices, so what's the matter with Tao Yanba's high hopes for Yulin? The Su family's woman hurriedly made a round. Missing Yulin must be a big loss for Longquan Jianzong. Yulin is now the golden core, and within 100 years, Yuan Ying is expected to be a great help from Qiu Lingshan. Old Ancestor Tao is among the 5 realms and will be the first peak. As long as the Ancestor Tao did not nod his head, the discussion in the Patriarch Hall would definitely fail. Tao Yanba stroked his beard and smiled. Can't say that. Where do you put the sect master and Uncle Xia? Then she picked up the teacup, held it high, and began to change the subject. This celebration, where the earth is like a cloud, is an unprecedented event in Aquarius Island in 1,000 years. I am here to substitute tea for wine. Congratulations to Yuan Zhua. The white-clothed old ape nodded, picked up the teacup and drank it all. The protector of Xinjiang Mountain suddenly said, looking back to find an opportunity, I casually slaughtered Lu Xianying as one of Tao Zi's dowry. Within the private mountains and rivers of Xinjiang Mountain with a radius of 800 miles, there is a Nianbo River. The river temple was built beside the Cayenne Canal. The 2 monks went out for a walk and went for a night tour. Following Jiang Shangzhen and Wei Ying, Lu Laoqing, the 3rd lord of the Real Realm sect, was surrounded by the female Yuan Ying monk who was enshrined in the 2nd seat, Li Fuyu. As for the chief worshipper who came to Xinjiang Mountain to congratulate him this time, the true monarch of Zhejiang, Lu Zhimao, went to drink with his friends on the mountain alone. Seeing Lu Laoqing speechless all the way, Li Fuyuan went straight to Kaiyanku, as if he had an appointment here. It's just that Li Fuyu is cautious by nature, and she didn't ask much if the Lord herself didn't say anything. Lu Laoqing caught a glimpse of Cayenne Chu from a distance, sitting alone on the dam drinking alcohol. He was an old friend on the mountain, the old gang leader of the invincible God Fist gang Gao Mian. Lu Leicheng's mood improved a bit, and he was not silent and asked casually, what's the matter with Guochuanxi from Xianyu County? I don't think he has any qualifications for cultivation, so why are you willing to accept it as an anonymous disciple? Li Fui replied, it was sect master Jiang's intention. He gave Guchuanxi a token and asked this person to go to Myaliu Island. Then he named him and said that he wanted to see me. How dare I take it lightly? Lu Laoqing nodded, and it made sense. Jiang Shangzhen did things based on his preferences and there was no common sense. Today's Xinjing sect, there is actually no obvious Shantao faction. At most it is Lu Jimao who is estranged from his sovereign. It's not that both Lu Laoqing and Lu Jimao are so pure-hearted and unwilling to have power and power. Gao Mian turned his head, leaned forward, stretched out his hand to push away Lu Leicheng's head, looked at Li Fuyu and asked, why? I am subdued by Gao's heroic spirit and have secretly admired him for a long time? Li Fui smiled and said, really not. Gao Mian asked, do you like the little white faces like Jiang Shangzhen and Wei Ying? Li Fuyu's scalp was numb and he was silent. Gao Mian retracted his hand, bumped into Lu Leicheng's flask and drank each. Gao Mian looked around and there were plum blossoms planted by the Cayenne Canal. The old man sighed, how blessed are the mountain people, accept this plum blossom. Lu Laoqing suddenly said in his heart, Lao Gao, don't be so listless. You can't see your favorite fairy in beauty, but there is fun to watch. Gao Mian sneered and said, it's lively? The Yellow River is like that? I don't think it's interesting. But when the next time the Yellow River Wenjian first line peak, I will definitely come to see it with my own eyes. Lu Laoqing smiled and stopped talking. Gao Mian wondered, how lively? Lu Laoqing pointed at the peak. Gao Mian asked in shock, where is it sacred, so courageous? Lu Laoqing sold it off, just wait. Gao Mian took a sip of wine. No matter what, as long as you dare to make trouble on the front line, it doesn't matter whether you succeed or not. I will give this person a thumbs up. It's a man. A wine bureau on the mountain had an early appointment, and the old man reunited here. When they arrived at different peaks of Xinjiang Mountain, they left their teachers and elders and then rushed to the party for a drink. Among them, Han Jingling, as the monarch of a country, was able to have a separate house on this peak. In addition to Han Jingling, who was already the emperor of the state of Shihao, Huang He, who has served as the Book of War for several years, Tian Hujuan, who has Lu Zimeo's eldest disciple, and her two juniors, Qin Nao and Chaozhe, and Huangladeo Island. LV Kaiseng, the master's junior, Xuanhuan, the master of Gumming Island, who is nicknamed Xuanhuan, and that Fan Yin, once a fool in everyone's eyes, is now the master of Chishui City. So except for Guqin, everyone is here. In the end, what everyone talked about was naturally around Guqin, the direct disciple of Zheng Juzhong, who once brought them together. It's just that everyone deliberately or unintentionally bypassed the other person, the Qingshan foreigner who worked as the accountant on Xianxia Island. Immortal Han Koz, and Lu Daochun's nephew of Lioli Pavilion, Xiaobei Fusus Jr. After leaving the Shujian Lake, Guqin, the demon king of the world, like a carp jumped into the dragon gate, and climbed to the sky in one step. Moreover, it is rumored that Guqin himself is already a mountain monk in the Yupu realm, and he has the title of Madman in the Middle-earth Shenzhou. Each piece of Guqin's piece by piece is very good at serving wine tonight. Probably, except Tian Hujuan, who has a different mindset, everyone else feels that they can meet Guqin in Shijianhu and Yu Rongyan. At the banquet, there were more than a dozen glazed women in colorful clothes. Although they were puppets, they danced gracefully with their joints twisted and creaking. And the master of Tian Hujuan, Lu Zimeo's visit tonight, is the deputy head of the Linlu Academy of Fayin Mountain, Huang Tingguo's 10,000-year-old Jiao, who seems to have been deliberately suppressing the environment. Because Lu Jimao practiced water law, he knew the old Jiao from the past. In fact, Lu Zimeo's relationship with the Jiaolong in the Fengshui cave of the Qiantang River is not bad. Lu Jimao asked a long-timely curious question. Why did you deliberately give up that piece of luck that should belong to you to Yuan Jinya? The old Jiao, who looked like an old Confucian scholar, smiled and said, I am a small water descent, how can I dare to compete with the great sage moving to break the ground? Lu Jimao smiled and toasted, it makes sense. On the side of Yunfeng, mountain gods from all over the continent gather, headed by the mountain Caiji, the mountain of the prince of Nanyue. The nearby Shuilong Peak is the top of Yanchu, the ancestor of Xinjiang Mountain Zhanglu. Various water gods and daffodils meet here, headed by the water of Yongjiang, who has the highest rank. Two waves of landscape gods are pushing their cups and changing cups tonight, because drinking is not so casual at the celebration. On the full moon peak of the patriarch Xia Yuansui, the distinguished guests from the Jiang family in Yunlin settled here. In fact, all the young children of the Jiang family came here, but all of them have special identities. The gentleman of Guanhu Academy is Jiangshan, and the master is Lu Laoqing. Jiangyun married faraway Jiangxing from the Fu family in Old Longqing, and 2 other guests without the surname Jiang. Among them, Xuanhuan had gone to meet friends elsewhere in the mountains. The 2 husbands and wives are close together, respectful, and do not interfere with each other. As for that Wei Liang who had been transferred step by step from the chief governor of the Qinghuan country to the Zhua assistant minister of the official staff of Dali, like Xuanhuan, he left Full Moon Peak and looked for drinks. The previous polite words of the Su family's woman were actually not all compliments. The time and the place are right and the people are in harmony. It seems that they are all in Xinjiang Mountain. Today, within a radius of 800 miles, there are so many cultivators from the earth, which is really rare. Therefore, at a banquet, a monk with a genealogy drank too much, and asked his friends around him. It would take a few yellow rivers to successfully ask the sword. Some people say that there are at least 3 and some people say that there are 5 yellow rivers. After all, no matter how good the yellow river is, no matter how high it is in swordsmanship, it is now in the Yuaning state. Now Xinjiang Mountain, even if you don't talk about the guests from all walks of life, they have 2. A monk in the 5 realms. In addition, the 3 Yuan Ing Lao Jianxian, the sovereign Zhu Huang, Tao Yanba and Yan Chu, said that they have given the Yellow River a lot of face. Talking about this happily, and at the end of the discussion, I came to a conclusion that he was a great monk in the Ascension realm, and he didn't dare to make trouble here. Messed up. On a Dali official ferry heading to Xinjiang Mountain, the owner was Chao Ping, the 2nd patrolling envoy in the history of Dali. Guaniran came to eat and drink. He was drinking a bowl of iced plum wine in a cabin house. The other 2 people at the wine table were friends for many years. Xuanhuan and Chi, they followed Guan. Like Iran, they were all accompanied by the Dali Frontier Army monk. Chi, a female from Fengshui Temple, is slender, but she carries a large sword with an extremely wide scabbard. As for Xuanhuan, who has withdrawn from the battlefield for many years, he has become rich. As a child of the Guan family in Yunzai County of Izhou, Guan Yiran first joined the army and served as a monk in the border army. With his military merits, he climbed step by step among the Dali Frontier Army. Dali cavalry went south, and Guan Yiran became responsible for garrisoning Shijianhu. The garrison general in Yunlu City later, along with civil servant Lu Qingfeng, and Lu Xuanmei, who was also the seed brother of the general, served as the Dadu supervisor. After Guan Yiran stepped down from the post of Chidu supervisor, he filled the vacancy at the Jingqing household department. At that time he was not promoted to one like Lu Qingfeng the minister. Guan Yiran, the grandson of Guan Lao Xiangshu, was not as good as an outsider like Lu Qingfeng. At that time in Dali capital, especially Cheer Street and Ichi Lane, he provoked a lot of speculation and most of them were injustice. In the early years, Xuanhuan, under the instruction of Guan Yiran, served as one of the newly established transport supervisors in Dali that year, and took charge of the mountain ferry route along the Longdao. The waterway of the mountain dynasty and the ferry route of the ferry house on the mountain. One is flowing with a steady stream of silver, and the other is flowing with ferry money. The supervising officer, the highest official grade, was originally the 3rd grade of Dalijing, and later upgraded to a level. From the 2nd grade, the general administration of supervision was built on the bank of Dadu, not in the accompanying capital of Dali, and was responsible for the size of Aquarius. More than 30 small mountain routes. Wait until the end of the war, Dallas territory has been reduced by half, so now there are only less than 20. Xuanhuan is in charge of the North-South Dragon Road, which is extremely important, so even if the official rank is not too high, it is only from the 4th rank, but he belongs to the first group of old people in the supervision administration and has real power. Taking the Longdao route is extremely important. It is a location with a lot of oil and water, so in the past 2 decades, Xuanhuan has been doing quite well in the officialdom of Dali. In addition to his responsibilities, he had a lot of dealings with various immortal masters on the continent, and accumulated a lot of friendship on the mountain. The food served with wine on the table was a big pot of drunk shrimp. Guan Yiran said in amazement, "Yeah, Lao Yu, you are very good at being an official now. Do you know how to pay a bribe? This big basin is not an ordinary river prawn, but the Halong in the Longdao. It is nicknamed Inzi, to the south of Aquarius Island. It is the heart of the old gluttons up and down the mountain." Guan Yiran held a bowl in one hand, and fiddled with the drunken's silver, with chopsticks in the other. Most of them were half an inch long, but there were also a few halongs with a finger length. He picked one of them and gave him a chopstick to Chi. Said, "We can be regarded as the light of supervising luck. Today's food is all real money." Xuanhuan scolded with a smile, The bribery of your uncle was bought by Lao Tzu with his own salary, not eating it. Guanyiran stepped on the bench and hooked his shoulders. After Chi chewed slowly, Guanyiran and Xuanhuan secretly raised their brows, and Xuanhuan smiled. Chi put down his chopsticks and left the house to find someone to chat. She came from the military monk in the Great Vulture Valley of Fengxue Temple, and this time there is another generation higher than her, Wen Qingfeng, who also served as a monk in the Dali army for many years. However, Fengxue Temple had a very poor view of Xinjiang Mountain, especially the Daegu where Chi was located, so she went down the mountain this time, and the senior Wen Qingfeng was just gathering with friends, and waited until the ferry was near Xinjiang Mountain. We'll disembark. On the ferry tonight, in addition to Guan Yiran, the official in Beijing, there is also Lu Xuanmei who is accompanying the capital. However, Guan Yiran was once a military commander under Su Gaoshan, but Lu Xuanmei was a real Chaoping confidant. On the bow side, Chi saw the woman who wore a large lean army sword, still dressed like that throughout the year. As long as the armor is removed, it is a narrow-sleeved brocade dress, black gauze pants, a pair of embroidered shoes and shoes. The pointed pendant has 2 Longin's orb. Chi called to Uncle Yu. She turned her head and nodded, her expression unchanged. Because Zhongyue turned out to be the southernmost mountain in the new Dali realm, and changing the name of the mountain was not just a simple change of the name on the Song family's landscape genealogy of Dali. Not only would Zhongyue itself hurt his muscles and bones, it would also be involved. The head of the prince and all the mountains and rivers within its jurisdiction. I heard that Jin Qing was on Weibo's side and he always ate a lot of food, not taking advantage of it. But among the mountain monarchs, Jin Qing really likes to compete with Weibo, and from time to time Fei Jin sends a letter to Piyun Mountain. Said that a great writer has a cliff-cut list and handed down a poem. Of course, he will humbly ask Weibo about the knowledge of holding a night party. After all, in this matter Wei Shanjun is an old senior, and it is recognized by several continents. In fact, the nickname of Wei Yao was first spread from Luapa Mountain. It seems that Chen Lingjun was the first to propose, and then he was promoted by the incense guy who came to Luapashen on time and brought him back to Zuqingwang. Now this guy is surrounded by a group of young people, saying that he wants to help the leader Pei Qian. In the state city while building a small subrudder, practicing martial arts every day, carrying a small tree branch as a spear and going back and forth, the whole Longzhou knew about Wei Yao, and the spread of Longzhou was equivalent to the whole Beiyue boundary. Chen Lingjun killed him without confessing, saying that Wei Shanjun had killed him unjustly. At that time, the boy in Xingyi was standing on the stone table beside the cliff, crying, beating his chest and swearing, saying he was such a person? It must be the old cook who drank and talked faint, otherwise it's Pei Qian, it must be her. This guy has the ability to nickname people. Luo Pashan claims to be second and no one dares to be the first. Besides, it may be a mistake of the word for millet grains. In short, it became a mess. The truth of the matter was the first statement that Pei Qian made, but back then she joked with Nuanshu and Xiaomili in private, and then when Zhoumili heard this statement was so coquettish, loud and tolerated when visiting the mountain. I kept chanting a few words, but after that he listened to Chen Lingjun. The speaker had no intention of the listener's heart, and the ghosts and gods made the later Ming Dong Beiyu. As a result, the Zhou Qinghuang, who had never taken officialdom seriously, almost had to visit Piyun Mountain in person to apologize and plead guilty to Shanjun Weibo. No matter how it conforms to the facts, it cannot be put on the table to bury people. Weibo, who is a big Beiyue land boundary and also in charge of the Longxing land of the Deisong clan, is he really a gentleman and gentleman Shanjun? How did the mountain Song Yuzhang, who moved from Luapa Mountain to Chiduan Mountain, end? Lu Qingfeng, the old Shangshu from the Ministry of Rites at the accompanying capital, was already sick. Many old people in Dei Temple, even the civilian officials who do not need to rush to the battlefield, are getting old one by one, and then some people are too old to walk, cannot go to the court and have to leave the officialdom one by one. It seems that only Jingshi Huamu is the oldest, Guanjia Shuwu the green tongs outside, the vines with purple clouds hanging down the ground and the fragrance of flowers in the streets of the Han family, and a peony from Baogua Temple are still fortunate enough to meet the spring breeze every year. The mansion of the national teacher Cui Yang in the capital was large. It used to be an old mansion, but inside it was simple, with a small 2-story book building named Renyun Iyun building by the national teacher. Now there is no owner. The emperor smiled and said, "The feng shui turns making people dizzy." Many scholars of the Song dynasty of Dali, when they were a vassal state of the Lu dynasty in the early years, had too many glorious landscape poems and travel notes for this suzerain country. The native people of the clan dynasty are more like the Lu clan. Write oneself Dallas native land is lacking in talents, but writing about the Lu dynasty, Wensi Quanyong, even if you want to search for intestines you must write. It is said that the traffickers and pawns of the Lu dynasty can chant poems and are full of scholarly families. The fairy winds on the mountains are the bones, the rivers and lakes are arrogant and righteous, and the roads are not superfluous. The Dali poems at that time were all written in the wind and sand of the frontier fortress, written by the hooves of the horses, and they sang with the poems in the wind and snow. Song Hexiao asked, "Is it just our Aquarius island? The mountain is not high, the water is not deep, and the cultivators are not so gods?" At the foot of the mountain the Dali dynasty once stood on the top of the mountain. The monks on the mountain who violate the ban will kill without mercy. Song Jisin replied, "Half is the sound of the horses' hoofs of the Dali cavalry, and half is the credit of the national teacher." Song He asked again, "Is it the wrong order?" Song Jisin smiled and said, "Your Majesty is extremely true." Song He is Chui Yang's disciple, and Song Jisin is Qi Jingchun's student. Song He stopped and turned his head, looking at the distinguished King Dali, his nominal brother and de facto elder brother, and said, "I owe you a lot, but I will not do anything to you in this matter. Any compensation?" Song Jisin smiled and said, "Your Majesty, don't say anything like this anymore. I just pretend that I haven't heard it today." Song He said with emotion, "It is a great fortune for the country to have an uncle in Dali." Song Jisin nodded and said, "There is no doubt." Song He followed and laughed, "In fact, the problem is not complicated. As long as you live longer than me, it will be fine for 3 to 5 years, 10 years. What do you think?" The Dali domain prince in front of him, it seems that he is not the middle 5-realm chi practitioner, Lujin realm? Is it really a state of staying? But have you learned some physical skills? Song Jisin smiled and asked, "What should I do if I live more than 10 years? Song He smiled and said, "Then say it again?" Song Jisin smiled and said, "As a courtier, of course you listen to your Majesty." Song He asked, "Why is Mr. Shirley determined that the two worlds will fight again?" Song Jisin shook his head and said, "The idea of the national teacher, anyway, I can't understand the ordinary master. The emperor called Chui Yong Mr., and the kings respectfully called Chui Yong the national teacher. There is a difference between relatives. The Dai dynasty was the only dynasty in Hauran, and when the war ended, it had already begun preparations for the next battle. The paper contract that Emperor Dai announced to Izhou is clearly written in black and white. As long as there is enough warfare, Dai will return the mountains and rivers of various countries after the war and restore the country. Dai Song has indeed kept its promise. Now only Heidai is left. Half of the time is not that continent or a country, and in the vast history of the world, only the Dali Song family can achieve this feat. The emperor whispered, "We all seem to get old soon." Song Jisin smiled and said, "I heard that Qingming Xianxia and the latest Wuxia Xianxia do not have this rule. The dynasty officials in the Qingming world, from temples to places, even must have a Taoist priest to be an official. And the emperors over there are often high-level practitioners, so compared to the dynasties and vassals in the Hauran world, there are more dynasties in the country life of 1,000 years in the Qingming world." The emperor finally asked a question, "If things go wrong, what should you and I do?" Song Jisin smiled and replied, "Now that the war is about to come, what does your Majesty care about the grievances on these mountains?" A young began to leave the station with the army, and went to a mountain ferry. "I heard that there is going to be another war. As for where to go or who to fight with, it doesn't matter. Every time the Dali cavalry is mobilized, wherever the horse's hoof reaches, what the soldier points at is a big victory. Life can be lost, but war cannot be lost." The Dali military commander who uttered this bold rhetoric was named Su Gaoshan, and the Dali patrolling envoy who made his official rank to the highest position of the military minister did what he said. The cavalry passed by a rural village. The young horseman turned his head and looked at a hillside. A group of children frolicking over there, jumping for joy, began to chase their cavalry. First, the Yellow River asked the sword at Bailudu, and then Lu Xianying appeared at the gate of Zushan, asking for the sword. It was indeed a bit noisy. The white-clothed old ape walked to the railing alone, squinted at the gate of the foot of the mountain. The little boy was quite witty, knowing that he would give a head with both hands to add to the icing on the cake for his celebration. What a pity. As soon as the people who watched the play blinked their eyes, they found that the good play had ended, which seemed uncomfortable. An old immortal master who has a close relationship with the Dali dynasty first carefully brewed his words, and then smiled. "The ignorant child, the frog at the bottom of the well, doesn't need to be bothered by the sovereign, and he just drives away. The Emperor Bamboo shook his head and said, "This person had a small feast with our Xinjiang mountain. Moreover, this person's ancestors also involved an old matter with Xinjiang mountain. I must ask the sword today. Lu Xianying has been brewing for a long time and it is difficult to be good." Hearing this, the old immortal master immediately understood that he would no longer dare to be a peacemaker between Xinjiang mountain and Longquan sword sect. It was easy for him to be innocent inside and out. Zhang Lianchu thought for a while and asked in his heart, "Mountain Lord, why don't Fei Jin pass the letter to Yulin, let him leave Yujiao Peak immediately and get this sword?" Yulu and Lu Xianying are about the same age and both are Jindanjian repairers. If Yulin loses, there is no one against Xiefeng Yuanbai. Yanchu has long felt that this person is extremely obstructive. Every time he discusses matters, he will only be half dead and sit at the door as the door god. Yuanbai is best in the mountains with Lu Xianying. A fight at the door and death at the same time counts, and there will be an extra chair in the Zushiteng in the future. However, the patriarch of the Master of Discipline quickly shook his head. He denied the proposal and changed his words. "It's better to let Wu Tijing go directly without any muddle and finish with a few swords. Don't delay the auspicious time for the celebration of Yuan worship. Ask the sword on the mountain." Generally there are two situations, either the winner or the loser will be judged, and the result will be in an instant. That was the scene when the Yellow River faced Sujia and Fengshua Temple Shengxiantai. Otherwise, the two sides are asking the sword, the strength is similar, and the flying sword does not have the situation of restraining one side, so it is extremely time-consuming, and the sword shines on the world at every turn, all the way to the thousands of miles of mountains and rivers. Although the former is mostly, the latter also often appears. Yanchu was afraid that Lu Xianying came here just to make a name for himself, and he would stop when he wins a game. If you lose, be discerning. Everyone knows that Xinjiang Mountain is a way of hospitality. Let Lu Xianying take this opportunity to reminisce about the past with the same door. Both sides win or lose. In fact, the victory or defeat is in the earlier kendo. Moreover, once Xinjiang Mountain asked these two people to go down the mountain to lead the sword, and obviously asked Lu Xianying's sword today, they did not take it seriously. Besides, the first two games were polite. In the third game from Xinjiang Mountain, the sword fairy was inadvertently, and the shot was a little heavier. It was reasonable even if it was unexpected that the flying sword or the longevity bridge was broken. In order to delay the breakthrough of the Yellow River, Xinjiang Shanzu Shirtang had a headache when discussing matters. It was the question of the sword on the mountain. In addition to winning and losing, it was more face-to-face. After all, Xinjiang Mountain at that time was far from the confidence that it is today, and couldn't afford to lose the slightest face. For example, at that time Xia Yuansui was old and had the highest seniority, and his realm was one level higher than that of the Yellow River, so he should not rush to Fenglei Garden. Xuanhuan was the lord of the mountain. After all, he was an old sword immortal in the same generation as Li Tuanjing. No, so it's almost awkward. In addition, Tao Yanba and Zhang Lianchu really didn't dare to say what their chances were against the Yellow River, which was a sword repairer in the same realm. So in the end, a Yuanbai that temporarily changed from the status of a guest to worship was introduced. Today is different from the past. The old swordsmen of the old and new peaks of Xinjiang Mountain no longer consciously have no chance of winning, but no one is willing to go down the mountain. It seems that the price has fallen for nothing. What if he wins against a young Jin Dan, who is entangled in a stunned head who does not know the height of the sky? It is a drudgery that is destined to have no face. The 10 young people of Aquarius, headed by Jinwu Mountain and Ma Kushuan, in addition to Xialing, Lu Baqiao, Jiang Yun, Zhou Sui Right, Yu Shiwu, these are all used in the war on the continent. A brilliant young genius. Among the 10 candidates, there is also Wu Tijing, a close disciple of Emperor Zhu Huang, who ranks very high and ranks second. Among the 20 people there is no one named Lu Xianying, let alone Lu Xianying, none of them has the surname Lu. Emperor Bamboo asked, "Is that so?" Several old sword immortals thought this matter was feasible. In the end, Yanchu squeezed out a talisman sword refined with a unique secret method, and the flying sword passed the letter to Qiang Zifeng. The sword light was like an autumn hong drawing an arc and went straight to Qiang Zifeng. The immortal carries the sword peak, and because there is no guard, Yuan Jinya is enshrined in the Guardian Mountain where he cultivates. After going to the Zhu Mountain, the mountain and water restriction is opened. The white-clothed old ape moved slightly in his heart, spreading his palms, looking at the mountains and rivers, a mountain boundary as far as his heart came. The landscape scene was delicate, but in the end he found no abnormalities. Yuan Jinya only regarded it as a common bird hitting the mountain, or it was the aftermath of some passing monks who accidentally touched the landscape and prohibited them. The Emperor Bamboo noticed the strangeness on the side where the mountain was enshrined, and immediately asked in his heart, "What's the matter?" The old ape in white shook his head and smiled, "It's okay." The Emperor Bamboo smiled and nodded. Indeed, now Xingyang Mountain is not worried about anything serious. There are only many happy events. Qiang Zifeng's ancestor of Kai Feng is a female sword fairy named Lung Qi. She has been in the Golden Core realm for 200 years. She wears 2 swords, named Qingshui and Tianfeng. She is also proficient in the transformation of the fairy family, so she has the reputation of, the 2 armpits are breeze, and the feathers are soaring. Among the 3 sword fairy embryos who climbed with Yu Lu at the time, Liu was among them. The young girl was successfully grabbed by Qiongji Peak and became the direct disciple of Lung Qi, the founder of this peak. After Lung Qi received the letter from the lawyer in charge, she rarely smiled. This old lady of the peak owner, with a very old face, a crane-haired cockskin and a fierce look, accumulates great prestige on Qiongji Peak. Lu Yu, the newly acquired protege, was very kind-minded and kind-eyed and said softly, "Yin Zhonglu has a letter from the front line of the peak. I hope you will go to Zushan with your imperial sword and ask Lu Xianying of Longquan Sword Sect. Now, within a stick of incense, let you do your best, it doesn't matter if you win or lose. It's just official language, can you take it seriously?" Lu Yu was obviously a little nervous, practicing in the mountains, whether it was in Xinshu Mountain or Qiongji Peak, the real catch and fight, and the truthful questioning of swords with people. It was the first time in his life, especially the other party was the direct descendant of Saint Ruan, and you still need to shoot the sword under the gaze of the senior immortal master on the top of the mountain. How can you not be cramped? Lung Qi smiled and said, "This discussion should be a reminiscence of the past. Ask the sword every time you ever try to play better. Just remember one thing, the last few swords, don't lose the prestige of Qiang Zifeng's ancestors." Lu Yu whispered, "Master, Longquan Jinzong has known my flying sword and supernatural powers a long time ago. That person is also the legend of Saint Ruan, and may take the lead. Her natal flying sword, Dihua. Once the flying sword was sacrificed, it turned thousands of swords into the sky." Lung Qi smiled and said, "It doesn't matter, just do as I said, you don't have to think too much." Lu Yu took a deep breath, the long sword was unsheathed, with a little tiptoe, stepping on the sword floatingly, and the imperial sword descended to the gate of Yixianfengshan. Zhang Lianchu saw the graceful figure of Qiong Jifeng. He used his magical powers and said loudly, "Qiong Jifeng Longmin Realm Sword repairs. Lu Yu leads the sword." If this Qiang Zifeng personally passed it on to Yu Jiafeng Yulin, he would most likely become a Taoist couple, and then take advantage of the opportunity to occupy the 1,000-year-old ownerless mountain. Yen Chu would really not mind teaching her a sword skill, saying the uncertain little girl can still use the Dragon Gate Realm cultivation base to win her Yuaning old sword fairy. On Qiang Zifeng's side, it was like Lu Jingchun who had entered the mountain. Standing beside the Taoist priest, he finally landed with a rock in his heart. Lu Zengchun's Taoist companion is the one with the best aptitude among Lung Qi's dozens of disciples. To be honest, Lu Jingchun was really worried about that Lu who stepped on and became Ruan Qiong's successor, played insidious tricks to retaliate against himself and his family. At this moment he is naturally in a good mood. He was born in Lizhu Dongtian as well as Lu Xianying, but the two are born in a cloud and mud. Lu Jingchun is a child of Lu on Fulu Street. How can he think of the guy who was almost killed by himself? Will he transform himself into Jianxiu, or is he a direct descendant of a big figure like Ruan Qiong? It's best to be killed. No, it is best to be beaten half to death and break the Shenkyo. Then the next time the deceased meet again it will be interesting. She said with a smile, "Husband, you have to pay more attention to making money in the future." Lu Jingchun smiled and nodded, "I have no shirk, and never let the lady worry about the money and let others roll her eyes." At the gate of Yixianfengshan, the long-awaited Lu Xianying opened his eyes and it turned out to be this Lu Yu. The two parties had never met before because before Lu Xianying returned to his hometown, Lu Yu had already left Xinshu Mountain. Lu Yu fell to the ground, collected the sword and returned it to its sheath, and with one hand pinched the sword art to give a gift. There was that strands of sword aura and lingering fingers like green onions. She signed up and said, "Qiong Jifeng, sword repairs Lu Yu." Lu Xianying sighed and was a little troublesome. Among the 3 people who went down the mountain in the past years, only the little girl in front of him was actually the progeny of Longquan Jianzong, but she was infatuated with the concubine so she followed to Xingyang Mountain. Lu Xianying smiled and said, "Miss Lu just makes moves." Lu Yu nodded, and without a word of courtesy, he directly sacrificed his life-flying sword Dihua. Within a radius of several tens of meters, all of them seemed to be all overwhelmingly fluttering. Lu Xianying stretched out a hand, just gently shaking his wrist, condensing a long sword with the essence of sword aura. Hundreds of flowers swirled all over the sky, instantly covering Lu Xianying's figure. In fact, Lu Xianying was extremely embarrassed at this moment. Qin Pingan had joked before. It is easy to talk about other swords, but you must think carefully about how to deal with Qiang Zifeng's Lu Yu. Lu Yu drew his sword out of its sheath, and his body disappeared in a flash, rushing into the sword formation, occupying the right place and people. In the early years of Longquan sword sect, several seniors who had climbed earlier had taught her how to sit in the sword formation. Especially Xia Ling, who was not well known at the time and later became famous, taught her a profound transformation of Taoism. Lu Yu obeyed the command of the master of genealogy, except for the flying sword and the sword formation. She also handed the sword to Lu Xianying with the sword moves handed down by Longquan sword sect. A series of sword qi brought out streams of fireflies, slashing towards Lu Xianying among the countless Dihua. Lu Xianying's trajectory is erratic, and the sword light is intertwined, but Lu Xianying only uses his sword energy to disperse all the flying swords of Dihua. The long sword in his hand is not a real thing. Cut off. What's going on with this girl, Lu? Are you bullying me to be exhausted from practicing in the mountains? Whether it's a sword formation or a sword move, I've seen it a few times, so I don't need to learn too much. After a while, Lu Yu muttered the sword art silently in his heart. The scattered sword auras that were cut off by Lu Xianying were all connected, like woven into a basket, besieging Lu Xianying, who was only defending but not attacking for some reason, and the sword aura suddenly condensed. Like a rope tightened suddenly. Lu Xianying was too lazy to want to crack the method, so he drew a gourd and drew the same sword tactics as Lu Yu. A sword formation sprang up out of thin air and slammed into each other. The strength was very good, just breaking the formation. Without hurting people, their sword auras were offset cleanly in pairs, and by the way, the flying swords of the fictitious and indeterminate Dihua flowers bloomed more like flowers. Lu Xianying was unwilling to look too much, so he finally took the initiative to gently pass with a sword. Even if the force was deliberately reduced, the sword light was still like an arc moon, bright and dazzling, and went straight to Lu Yu. As a result, she first protected her with hundreds of snow-white scorpion flowers, and was cut to pieces by the sword light. Blocking the front with the sword in his hand, the shoulders on both sides were still rushed by the sword light like water, the robe was rotten, and there were 3 obvious wounds on one arm and shoulder. The blood was blurred and it was terrible. Lu Xianying was more dull and speechless than Lu Yu because he felt tired. It's like fighting with a little slug back then, pretending to fight back and forth. Naturally, it's more tiring than fighting a little with a mouth full of flying swords and crying. As soon as Lu Yu gritted her teeth, she remembered masters saying that she played beautifully within a stick of incense. She bit her head and did not hesitate to exhaust her aura, running that natal flying sword, patches of flowers, lingering around, protecting one person and one sword, although the number is far lower than before, but each piece of Dihua contains snow-white sword energy, which is quite impressive. Like the wind blowing one side, a large group of Dihua swiftly floats towards the sword repairer who she had had the opportunity to call senior. Lu Xianying sighed, threw out the long sword in his hand, hovered in front of him, centered a sword, and on the left and right sides, hundreds of identical long swords appeared one after another. The strength of the sword was strong and the sword intent was heavy. Like a rural Mongolian boy who is lazy in reading, he has written countless vertical strokes. But in the eyes of the monk in the mountains, Lu Xianying's sword formation was like a line of iron cavalry, with a mighty sword spirit. That group of really beautiful flying flowers, hitting the sword formation, aroused several feet of snow-white debris, like the tide hitting a cliff, in vain. Lu Yu had to collect the magical powers of the flying sword and condensed it into a snow-white pocket flying sword. He forcibly endured the pain caused by the trembling of the soul, flashed away, and the sword light drew an arc, sweeping towards the back of Lu Xianying's heart. Lu Xianying remained indifferent, but looked at the woman's eyes and found some clues. Alas, this soft-hearted silly girl. You said that it's not good who you like, but you just like that lusty Yulin. Even if you go down the mountain to change the sect, where to go to practice sword is not good, but here comes the Xinjiang mountain which has long been slanted into the gutter. Lu Xianying moved a step sideways, dodged the snow-white flying sword, knocked the back of his hand lightly, knocked the Dihua into the air, and then stopped, deliberately delaying the questioning sword. The old monk stood on the edge of the mountain cliff, waving his hands to gather clouds. A mirror flower, water and moon fairy method appeared out of thin air, so that the vulgar sun in the peak would not miss the turmoil on the Zhu mountain in vain. The owner of this peak is one of the 3 female ancestors of Xinjiang mountain. The other 2 are Qiangzifeng Lingqi, a Jindan Jianxiu, and the dogwood Feng Xuanhuan who is in charge of the landscape diaries and the mirror flowers. In other words, it's the same female peak owner who always looked down on Qiangzifeng, who would only hide on the mountain to enjoy the blessings. Qiangzifeng would look down on where the bird would not stand. In the end, Tianwan didn't dare to look down on anyone. Smiley face is kind. Because Pianju Peak is the same as Boyun Peak, where sword repairs in the mountains and the downhill experience place are fierce battlefields like Old Dragon City. Most of the people who stayed on this peak of Xinjiang mountain are the emperors and generals of the dynasty and vassal under the mountain. For example, the monarch of Shihao Kingdom, Han Jingling, rested here, but the national power was weak, so he arranged a remote small country for the monarch of the small country. In the house, although there are mostly female practitioners on Pianju Peak, the sword repairmen in the mountains are extremely murderous, regardless of men and women. Xinjiang Mountain has arranged this way and handed a lot of mountain giants to Pianjufeng, which has its own profound meaning. The people who were going to take the Fuzhou to the first-line peaks to congratulate each other stopped and stayed in the mountains, or left the house, looking at the landscape painting. They talked for a while. Who? I don't know, I haven't heard the name. It's Lu Xianying of the Longquan sword sect in Day. He has no reputation. It's normal to have never heard of it. Remember, it's the brother of Xialing. I am currently a little disciple of Saint Ruan, but I am definitely not a disciple of Guanmen. The fairy family on the mountain, especially the Xianxia sect, the most interesting and cheating character is not actually the disciple of a certain suzerain or ancestor, but the closed disciple. This person must be surprised and brilliant. Only then is qualified to let the master take the mountain and close the door for the martial art. Just like the gate of the market under the mountain, the Yaoer at the home of Yinshan must be loved. The enshrined immortals who had a rough understanding of the Longquan sword sect began to be very interested, and introduced him to the monarchs, ministers and descendants around him. Lu Xianying, a native of the old Lizhu Dongtian, got the moon near the water tower and was extremely lucky to become the direct disciple of Ruan Qiong of the Jianzong sect of Longquan. This person is half-talking. Because the remaining words should not be said directly. Or is it Ruan Qiong's intention? A monk of the upper 5 realms, a sage of the military, his family is the Snow Wind Temple, and the most famous swordsmith in Aquarius. What's more, Ruan Qiong also has a prominent title dedicated to the chief of Dali. Therefore, Ruan Qiong's every move will be extremely involved. When he reached the gate of Zushan Mountain and confronted the Longmen realm woman Jian Xiu, Lu Xianying saw that he could only parry. Some people wondered, that's it? Someone joked on the side, is this guy's courage and tone much higher than his realm? So when the first questioning sword led the sword is over, not only the Pianchi Peak but the other peaks all have Fuzhou relaunched to the first-line peak, which is probably nothing to see. Then when the Yujiao Peak fell to sleep, the Fuzhou ferry returned to the peaks and continued to watch Jinghua Shueiyue. After all, it would be too much to hover the ferry on the front line of the peak to watch the excitement up close. A young genealogy cultivator said for no reason, "Why do you think we are a little bit Beiju Luzhou?" As soon as this statement came out, it echoed a lot. On the steps of the main road of Zushan Mountain, Lu Xianying stopped, turned his head and looked around and smiled. He saw a woman Jian Xiu who had never seen a scene before. It looks like a hidden but extremely powerful sword fairy of Yuaning. If you shouldn't show up, it's better to hand the sword far away. Before the two sides asked the sword, the white-clothed old ape laughed and said, Lu Xianying, is it for your deceased ancestor of the Lu family to confess your mistakes with Xinjiang Mountain and admit your ancestor? Lu Xianying rubbed his cheeks and ignored it. Because of such things as swearing, Qin Pingan, a bad guy, is better at it. On the back of the sword peak, that really bad blue shirt, with his hands folded, looked at the ancient sword that was inserted diagonally on the top of the mountain. A rickety old man climbed slowly and grinned hoarsely, "You little baby, this is not a good place to be in a hurry." Qin Pingan turned his head and looked at it. He was a ghost but not a cultivator, and then laughed. No wonder the old man is not a sword fairy but a martial artist of 9 realms. Or the grandchildren who have moved to the mountain to learn boxing for many years. Seniors are right. Feng Shui is not good here, and it is not suitable for reincarnation. It will be difficult to be a man in the next life. The nickname of the old man Jilin consecrated, squinted his eyes and smiled, whereas the young man, such a talking rare, like wait for your boy's head to be turned off and chat with the old man for a few years. The mountains are lonely. In order to thank you for this young generation, the soul lighting is avoided. Chen Ping'an raised a foot, stepped on the hilt of the long sword and said with a smile, "We are both night tourists. We ran into ghosts halfway through each. For the sake of being half a fellow man, I will give you one." Fei Jin spreads a letter to the opportunity to rescue soldiers. The old ghost chuckled, "Listen to the tone, it's not a small vengeance with Xianxia? Now the young people outside the mountain after a few days of fisting, are they so capable?" Chen Ping'an tweeted, "I'm so daring, I dare to call his name directly, I have to call the ancestor of the mountain." The old ghost rubbed his hands and said, "Well, I will chat with you in the future. I will definitely relieve my boredom. The last name is very famous. The old man will not kill the nameless ghost." The blue shirt lightly kicked, stepped on the long sword and smiled, "It's from a small place, the name is not worth mentioning." The old man stepped forward and handed out a fist, but Chen Ping'an reached out his hand and held his fist. The ghost of the nine-realm Wufu immediately retreated when he saw that he couldn't make a single blow. Afterwards, the figure was ghostly, surrounded by the blue shirt, handing his fists non-stop, blinking his eyes and making more than 100 punches. The punches can kill the golden core on the mountain. Wearing a blue shirt, he just stood in place with one hand down, and blocked the opponent's fists with his right hand. When the last punch was delivered, the old man Jilin took advantage of the momentum and pulled out a talisman from his sleeve. He must stay away from the backsword peak. This uninvited guest, the dog day, turned out to be the end of a young appearance. Takeo. The back of his neck was cold and he was caught by the man with one hand, fell to the ground, and slammed his middle back with one foot, breaking on the spot. The old ghost was forced to disperse his soul and was smashed by a sleeve. Both sides of the questioning box have already separated life and death, but they don't seem to know the name of the other side. Chen Ping'an stomped his foot, and the long sword on the ground not far away bounced. When Yu Feng traveled far away, he held it in his hand and headed to Yixian Feng Zhu Shirtang. In the end, he followed a path to the top of the sword Dao, and his figure fell on the sword top square. The sword energy around the mountain seemed to be deaf and dumb, and it seemed that he hadn't noticed any outsiders breaking into it. Anyway, Chen Ping'an went straight to the ancestor. The door of the hall. A female practitioner from Wamafeng, who was the first to spot the man, was dumbfounded for a while and then asked softly, "Are you?" All the female cultivators saw that in addition to the backsword in the blue shirt, they also carried a sword in their hands at will, turned their heads and smiled, "Guest. You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.